Hello, and welcome to the Corporate Storytime podcast series. My name is Lucas Robinson, the host of the podcast. On this pod, I'll get the opportunity to talk to ASX company leaders and innovators as they run through their personal executive journeys and the stories behind the companies they are helping to grow today. I'll be leveraging my experience as a former stockbroker and my current role with investor relations consultancy, Corporate Storytime. But enough of that. For now, let's gather round, come in close, and let me tell you a story. Hello and welcome back to the Corporate Storytime podcast. In this first edition of the podcast for 2025, I'm pleased to be joined by Jindalee Lithium CEO Ian Rodger for a chat. Jindalee trades on the ASX under the code JLL and is focused on advancing the company's wholly owned McDermitt Lithium Project, which is located on the Oregon-Nevada state border in the USA. Since Ian last appeared on the podcast in May 2024, Jindalee has delivered a pre-feasibility study at McDermitt, which defines a multi-decade project with extremely robust economic outcomes. Ian, thanks for joining me again, mate. What are some of the aspects of the PFS which you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lucas, and good to be on the podcast again. Look, the PFS was a critical milestone for the company. There was prior to that there was no parameters out on the project in the market, and what the PFS really demonstrated is a large, long life, low cost lithium carbonate project that's strategically important to the US. And I think if we zoom out for a second and have a look at the size of the resource, it's one of the largest in the US and very similar in size and scale. Some of your listeners might remember the comparison to Thacker Pass next door. Really a very similar deposit, and the PFS, which was led by or the key engineer, I should say, was Fluor Corporation, a really blue chip engineering construction company with a large presence in the US and a strong experience in lithium sediments. Really ran the test work program, and through that PFS program, we fully validated the flow sheet and really produced a quality outcome in terms of engineering. The so what is we now have a set of parameters that look similar. Similar capital intensities, similar OPEX, bottom half of the cost curve to Lithium Americas, which is obviously much larger company funded through the US government and General Motors. So they're really, I guess, for people looking at us, we're really a earlier stage Thacker Pass project in a lot of ways, and I think this pre-feasibility study demonstrates that.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't we talk about some of the numbers associated with the pre-feasibility study? I mean, I'm looking at a presentation which suggests there's a $3.2 billion US NPV post-tax, there's a 5-year payback, and a 63-year project life. And obviously, as you say, it's a mining project, but it's really an industrial project, isn't it? It's a chemical conversion project built next door to a mine that's going to try and generate value from one of, if not the largest, lithium resource in the US.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think you mentioned some of the key numbers there. The long life production, I think, we're only using about 15% of the contained metal. But even then it's large scale, over 40,000 tonnes a year of lithium carbonate production over 63 years. So it's really unusual in terms of, long life project. But I think the context is key, because when people look at the parameters of the project, like you said, it's a large processing project, a significant capital investment, but high returns over a long period of time. And that's really, the strategic value of the asset, because it's in the US producing lithium chemicals. We can unpack it a bit later, but the with the Chinese controlling the lithium market, there's a big push in the US for reshoring mining and lithium chemical production, and this is clearly an asset that's can really make a material difference. And it has, because of its location, an efficient pathway from lithium out of the ground into lithium chemicals ready to go into the battery value chain. It's really got some strategic value.
Yeah, well, why don't we talk about the subject that everyone around the world's talking about, which is the Trump presidency and the fact that he's returned to the White House. Obviously, his campaign was all about America first, and it seems from the sort of tariff policies that he's implemented very early in his second presidency that he's certainly living by that slogan. What does that America first idea mean for Jindalee?
Well, I think it has a number of positive impacts, or potentially positive impacts for Jindalee. I think in the first couple of weeks of his presidency, he outlined his key priorities, of which is reasserting essentially America's mineral dominance, and then a series of executive orders, amongst other things, directing some of the key departments to review the permitting process for large industrial projects. So we think that the results of that are yet to be seen, but that's as good as it gets in terms of a signal of intent from the incoming administration on that they want to incentivize and develop domestic resources. He's also, as part of those executive orders, directed some of the grant and programs office to look at, amongst other things, critical minerals production. So we expect that to be positive for us over time, but we won't know the results of that for a couple of months. But it's really, really encouraging. And yeah, the US, any US project now really has that enhanced strategic value because of that real focus on domestic production.
Yeah, you talked about the potential for government funding being available for projects like this, and you also mentioned earlier on Thacker Pass, which is owned by Lithium Americas and is just to the south of the McDermitt Project. With Thacker Pass and other projects that Australian investors might be familiar with that are being promoted by companies such as Ioneer and Patriot in North America, what can you point to in terms of examples out there of both government funding opportunities and industry funding opportunities? I suppose with specific reference to the Department of Energy in the US, who Jindalee are talking to at the moment about the McDermitt Project and potential for funding partnerships.
Yeah, good question. I guess I'll start on the government funding side. So, I guess the two most advanced lithium sedimentary peers in the US are Ioneer and Lithium Americas, and they've both received large, I guess, concessional finance loans from the federal government. Ioneer in the order of $1 billion, Lithium Americas for Thacker Pass in the order of $2.3 billion. And in their case, funding 75% of their capex with a loan that's at Treasury rates, so circa 5%. Over a life of 25 years. So that's particularly from Australian investors that don't haven't, I guess, can get not across this. That's really cheap project finance that's not available anywhere else in the world. And so that really enhances equity returns. And so those loans potentially available to Jindalee down the track as we approach production, and Trump's now reappointed a head of the loan programs office, which is where those loans come out of. And I guess we'll understand more around his intent there. But given his focus on domestic investment, we expect that to be positive over time. There's also a range of other. I won't go into detail, but there's other concessional loans out of the federal government, out of other different parts of it that are potentially apply to us. but then just staying on the government side, we recently, in the end of last year, executed a cooperative research and development agreement with the Department of Energy. So, we haven't really spoken, we're too early in the process to really engage with those loans, but we've got good traction with the DOE through this cooperative research and development agreement that they're doing work on the project at the moment. And then our focus has been more on the pre-production grant funding, non-dilutive grant funding, which is essentially, a non-recourse, essentially gift from the federal government that has to be, co-funded by our own dollars. And so we've, applied for a Department of Defence grant application to fund the next phase of work, and we expect with the government review of funding, etc., and funding budgets being finalised, hopefully this quarter, that we'll get an update, sometime early this year. But we've been working on that for a long period of time, and we're well advanced. But there's still due process to go on there. But we'll continue to focus on funding from the grant, the grant funding opportunities in the short term, while positioning ourselves to get those longer term loans. And then in terms of the second part of your question around the strategic interest, I think what we've really seen in the market is that there's real differentiation in the views of strategic investors, which remain active, continue to sort of place bets at the bottom of the market, versus your run-of-the-mill generalist investors, which are risk off in the lithium space, and with equity valuations across the board very, very low. And so we've seen from very high level, we've seen Rio Tinto obviously acquire Arcadium Lithium in a circa $10 billion acquisition. We've seen Pilbara acquire Latin Resources, thanks for that, in South America. But then from a US/North America bit, in the last couple of months, we mentioned Lithium Americas, their partnership with General Motors, which now has taken a shape of a joint venture. They agreed to put in another couple $100 million at the tail end of last year, which takes their commitment up to $950 million US, plus a $2.3 billion loan. I think that really just paints a picture of what the potential is for Jindalee, because people look at us and say big project, big capital, but it's in a lot of ways it's like a copper porphyry asset that it's the way you get these things developed is through partnerships and in our case leveraging the tailwinds in terms of government funding. So there's been lots of activity in the space, and then you mentioned Patriot as well. There's still activity from both players in the battery value chain, but EV OEMs in the space. I mentioned General Motors just then, but obviously VW with the Patriot deal is just a key action speaks more than words. We've seen a lot of commentary in particularly in the US and Europe around how the EV thing's slowing down, but if you actually pay attention to, say General Motors Q4 results presentation, listen to Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford. They're doubling down on EVs. They know, they know they're the future. I think, General Motors is approaching, profitability in their EV space. They're bringing out new offerings. They got more cars, more different models on offer in the US, in the electric vehicle space, and Tesla does. They're the fastest growing EV producer in the US. And so, the key theme there is really that the strategics are, still interested, and they're still active, and really, it's an opportunity for investors, if the people that understand the industry are still investing well, it's a sign that, the future's still bright, and that there's value to be had.
Oh, mate, that was a sensational response that covered everything that I mentioned, and paints a really good outlook for both the private and public sort of funding opportunities. I particularly like the analogy towards the porphyry assets, mining assets, and the multi-generational opportunity that you guys are looking at there at McDermitt is pretty applicable to that analogy. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but and my view is that the elastic band is going to snap back after a difficult couple of years for lithium. But what's your outlook for 2025 calendar year for the lithium space?
Yeah, well, I think I guess if you zoom out a bit, anyone who's been around the lithium market or any commodity market knows that these things are cyclical, and to describe the current industry is that whether it's a third or a half of the cost curve is currently losing money. Even some of the best assets in the business are losing money. There's production being shut in, or and projects being delayed across the board. And so it just means that we're eating through the surplus in the market, and that that underinvestment will mean that we snap back at one point. There is, I think the market's expected to tighten up a bit this year, but obviously there's some latent capacity that can probably come back in that are likely to put a lid on any price run this year. That's I guess the consensus view from different analysts. But looking into towards the end of the year and into 2026, no one really knows. But there's a big deficit that's going to emerge, and the only way that projects get moved forward, particularly greenfield projects in the Western world that can produce chemicals, be them in Canada, the US, or South America, they need prices to be substantially higher to build these projects. And so what we do know is those prices will respond quickly once the market reaches that tipping point. And I think it'll surprise people when it happens. I mean, if we look back at prior cycles in the lithium industry, they turn very quickly, and we've seen the prices sort of appear to be bottoming from October. If you have a look at the price achieved from some of the Aussie spodumene producers, for example, that gives you a decent signal that we're sort of coming out of the bottom, and that investors should have an eye on a recovery over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, and it's a real value opportunity.
I agree. So maybe we talk about the local community in and around McDermitt. I noticed in the PFS you talk about 1,000 jobs being created in the construction of the project and 600 ongoing in operations. How do you describe your relationships within your local community there?
Yeah, good. I think we announced in the middle of last year, we'd signed some communications agreements with the local key local tribal group to do work on the project and essentially a communication agreement, but also to do ethnobotanical studies, for example, as part of our ongoing permitting efforts there. We've got an increasing. We've recently appointed a key person, an ESG manager, to drive not only the permitting but our community engagement up there. And as we sort of get more progressed, the engagement will continue. I think from a broader level, we've had support from different levels of government over time with some of our applications for funding, and that cooperative research and development agreement, for example, was supported by a key federal senator from Oregon. So I think when we look at the project, it sort of falls in the middle of the priorities of both the state and federal level in terms of generating jobs. It's lithium contributing to energy security. It's important from a climate change, energy transition point of view as well. And so we're sort of buoyed, and we're going to I guess continue to do work to make sure that it drives a lot of value at the grassroots level and for the local community, but also more broadly for the state and federal levels to get that buy-in to take the project forward.
Oh, that's great. Well, the PFS was obviously a huge milestone. You spent a lot of time working on that with first-class partners as well. And the outcomes are extremely positive for the project in the long run. Is there a parting message that you'd like to leave your shareholders and interested investors before we wrap it up?
I think, look, we've got a really, exciting 25 ahead of us with a number of key, catalysts in the pipeline. We're working on a key permitting milestone in the middle of, that we expect sort of, sometime this year, around perhaps the middle of the year. Our plan of operations, which will allow us to increase exploration on site and collect the sample required for further studies. So that's going to be a key milestone for us. We are, engaging with potential partners to take the project forward, and we expect to build some momentum in that space with appointing advisors, etc. in the short term. So, and that'll be the real catalyst to drive us forward into the next stage of the work program. Getting the right partners on board will be key to be driving this sort of really strategic asset forward. And the last point is we're I've touched on bottom of the cycle, even compared, to our peers that are also, trading at depressed valuations. Jindalee is cheap on any metric. So I think I'd encourage investors to take a look. And we're highly leveraged to a lithium recovery, and so there's a real potential for outsized returns through market recovery, but also the team executing on some of these key catalysts over the next 12 to 24 months.
I love it. All right, America first. Go McDermitt. Go Jindalee.
Made in America.
Thanks a lot, Ian. Appreciate the chat. I look forward to getting this one out soon. Thank you for listening to the Corporate Storytime podcast. We're really trying to build our audience for the podcast and aim to deliver regular episodes of our chats with executives from some of the ASX's most interesting companies. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends, follow the podcast and give us a like wherever you download it. And if you have any feedback, please drop us a line at info@corporatestorytime.com. Thanks and all the best.